Matthew chapter 7, verse 6 says, "Do not give what is sacred to dogs. Do not throw your pearls to swine. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and then turn and tear you to pieces." This is another one of Jesus's hard sayings. Now, in Jewish culture and custom, and even in the Old Testament, in the book of Deuteronomy, pigs and dogs were animals that were considered to be unclean. And Jesus is contrasting this with someone who hears the gospel, who doesn't have an appreciation of the gospel, who doesn't have an appreciation for the truth. Jesus is saying we mustn't actually continue to present or to give the truth to people who are hostile to the truth. Now, Jesus himself is someone who modeled this. We're told in the book of Matthew chapter 13 that when Jesus sent out his disciples, he told them not to stay in a house that didn't want to accept the gospel. He told them to dust their feet and begin to move on from that house. But Jesus himself, even when he was preaching the gospel and people's hearts were hardened towards the gospel and they were very hostile to the gospel, Jesus himself began to withdraw. You'll also see that when Jesus is being questioned by Herod Antipas, Jesus largely remains silent before him. He doesn't try and, confront him or to share the truth with him. And yet we see him preaching to tax collectors, preaching to those who are sinners, preaching to the prostitutes, preaching to those who are willing and open to hear the gospel. But yet to those whose hearts have been hardened, Jesus turns around and he doesn't actually share with them. And the idea here is that if you give a dog a pearl, the dog might try and bite the pearl. The pig might try and bite the pearl. But what will happen eventually is that they will realize that this is actually not something that they can consume. It doesn't match their desires. It's not what they're looking for. And therefore will then begin to trample upon it. So that's the idea here, is that when we give the truth to some people might be hostile to the truth because it doesn't actually lead or go to where they want it to go. And then they begin to become hostile towards it. It's also said in the book of Proverbs chapter 9, verse 8. It says, "Do not rebuke mockers or they will hate you. Rebuke the wise and they will love you." And what this book is basically trying to tell us is that the people who are hostile to the truth, we must leave them to their hostility. But those who are willing to accept correction, those who are willing to accept the truth, those are the people that we should begin to share with. So really what we need to learn here is to discern. When I share the gospel or the truth with someone, I need to begin to discern if this person has a heart that is willing to hear. Now, all of us initially had a heart that is a heart of stone, not willing to hear the gospel, until God actually in the heart began to make our hearts softer so that we would be willing to hear the gospel. But if that has not happened to people, actually most people will have hearts that are very hardened and very hostile to the gospel. So we need to practice discernment. We need to know when to share and when to withdraw. We need to know when to discern how and when and to whom we should begin to share the gospel, because not everyone is willing to hear the truth. And so we should focus our energy in sharing and speaking to those who are willing and accepting of the truth.